Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, Chandan.
I,
So, Chandan, as was introduced to you, is a social scientist by training, but he would like to insist that he's more of a humanities person who's now looking at life from an interdisciplinary approach. His book, Another India, is a fascinating vignette of a series of small, cutaways, if you can use a television term, of people, mythological tales, folk tales. A lot of it, the entire oeuvre is from, the body of it is largely Kannada, Karnataka, and he starts off with a very interesting, portion where he speaks about how there is yet to be established Kannada stereotype. So let me ask Chandan to initially get going by saying you sort of literally almost feel a little wistful about the lack of a stereotype for the Kannada speaker, but at the same time you also say it gives us a delicious freedom.
Yeah.
So what sort of triggered that?
Thank you, Suresh, for the words on the book. If there's an element of wistfulness, I wish that was not there. I mean, I absolutely wanted to note that, in India, some communities, there's an image of a Tamilian, an image of a Malayali, an image of a Bihari. There's no image of a Kannadiga. And I mentioned it to simply note a fact of something that interests me a lot, which is a singular fact. That there are things that are not stereotypable things. Stereotypes are essentially something not to be happy about, not just vis-a-vis community identities, but in talking about experience in general, actually. Because most of us work with archetypes of, historical institutions, events, etc. So it's really, that's why I opened the piece with that. And I really feel, as far as your own interest in exploring yourself goes, understanding yourself is something that you care about. A stereotype is something whose absence you will welcome.
The preface to the book is a fascinating, part of the book because it establishes exactly where you're coming from and what you sort of want to do with this book. And if I may sort of quote from here, in a free relationship with the civilizational moral inheritance, their creative imaginations also put on trial the ideas of modernity that have only grown in power since colonial times. The secular indifference to these moral conversations that have flowed over centuries is truly unfortunate. It has meant a shrinking of moral imagination in the present. So this is like a running theme right through your book. This is
Yes.
the thread that binds all the stories together, the tapestry that you have woven. What is it that has really made you sort of talk about this lack of moral imagination? What has driven you to want to write about this so strongly?
Thank you, Suresh. I mean, just imagine you care for India's democracy or you care for equality, and then you're thinking about making moral arguments in favor of equality. And of course, people reach out to the Constitution because there is an understanding of equality there. But there are many, many, many other imaginations of equality that will be seen broadly as being religious in nature, or having popular moral imaginations. I mean, there are so many. You can identify them by sect, by community, by religion. And, we're talking of a huge country like India. So in Tamil Nadu, Tirukkural, of course, is very, very, it's an iconic text. But then there'll be a whole host of other moral conversations, big saints who will have initiated their own understanding of how does one be a good human being. And in India, the way we have evolved, half of us have been through the modern education system where you're lucky if you run into these Sangam literature as poetry in your Tamil language texts or some Tagore poem, etc. But otherwise, it's all utility-driven education, right? What is history? A sense of dynasties, economic facts, some political facts, some cultural facts, who wrote what, etc. Drive, which are not evocative. They don't evoke anything in you. And this is British-induced utilitarian education, right? It has to have a utility. It has to give you something that will allow you to work anywhere in an industrial society. You're literate enough to be able to be employable everywhere. So that's the criterion, and you get a certain kind of standard education. But since half of our fellow sort of members of our society haven't gone through this education system, they continue to have other conversations. They, in their living memories, there is other moral conversations still running. Like, you can give an example. If you get into a taxi or an auto rickshaw, you may find a sticker of a saint or of some guru. And these are not just a sticker or a photograph. There's a big living tradition behind it, with huge numbers of people who are still feeling respectful towards it and living by it. But we don't know, and we are in a position to not care to know. And I'm saying, unlike in the West, where, for example, when the Grimm's brothers collected their fairy tales from different parts of Europe and presented it, Europe was encountering them for the first time, as it were. They had forgotten everything. Not so here. If you share these stories, many people will still know them. And if you're trying to craft a certain relationship with not just your political values and the world of, your own ideals, but do it in a way that is resonating with a big section of people around you, then I think there's a reorientation required. So Suresh, this book is really addressed to the educated Indians, who I'm sure, if they've gone through a certain education system, have actually been removed actively from a very vast moral sort of conversation. Many kinds of conversations, some of them at odds with each other. Let's not just have a romantic idea that there are all these great moral conversations living harmoniously with each other. I mean, they have been in conflict in the past, we know that. But to the extent we are in a position to see what else is around us in a living way, I'm not proposing going back to the archives and looking them up in the libraries and trying to give them life, as it were. Although that is something you could also do if you want to, because that's the work of creative artistry, right? I mean, you can bring alive a story and give it life in the present. I mean, you're free to do whatever you want. But at the same time, because, Naipaul's characterization of India in India Wounded Civilization was what? It was a half-made society, right? And he got away with that scandalous description. What is half-made? He's saying you're not fully modern. But in his mind, and in the mind of our economic planners, the idea is that we should be fully modern. Anything else is a non-desirable situation, and you better do something to accelerate the process of becoming modern. But that was what? In the mid-70s. It's 50 years since, we continue to be half-made. I don't think it's... so you can complain the way he does, and a lot of our economic planners have nothing but modernizing the Indian economy in mind, and rural India is an afterthought. You may, if you read the Niti Aayog planners talking about how the excess population in the countryside have to be transferred to cities and be skilled to supply the needs of a growing city population, become plumbers, electricians, carpenters. I mean, this is the vision being presented as policy wisdom. And so this is not an intellectual case alone. We're also trying to see how can we reorient the way we're running ourselves as a society. And here I think the educated Indians, and it could be an English educated or even non-English educated, there's not going to be a huge difference in how you're viewing the past and the future. And this is something I think we'll get to soon enough.
So actually the aspect you spoke about how colonial education sort of has vested us with this approach of utilitarianism being given a primacy. I found it very interesting in this, so you've broken this book up into sort of sections. And in the coming into focus section, you have a particular chapter which talks about M.N. Srinivas and the lure of the literary.
Yes.
And M.N. Srinivas is considered one of the authorities in, Indian authorities in sociology. And you make this very, should I say, sort of wistful remark that an engagement with the literary works in Indian languages would have likely shaken up the modernist framework of Indian sociology, reshaping its sensibilities and routing its curiosity in novel directions.
Yes,
so
thank you.
You sort of have commented on M.N. Srinivas's work, and I sort of just adverted to that because of you spoke about the utilitarian thing. At another level...
Suresh, if I may just say what I may have wanted to say in that chapter. And M.N. Srinivas is a distinguished sociologist, all of you know. But he's also written short stories, which very few will know. And he's written a piece on Bangalore. In many pages, he talks about the recent writings in Kannada literature. And I was surprised when I read these things because he's kept his sociology separate from this. Because he was building the discipline of sociology with a very narrow sense of what its boundaries should be. He thought he was being professional and responsible because he's one of the founders of the discipline in the country. But I say, if he had made the reading of Indian language texts part of one's training as a student of sociology, we would have had a very different sociology. Because the worlds of, the self, the Tamil self, the Telugu self, the Malayalam self, which you read in literature, is not the same as what you encounter in social science description. Because it's, you glimpse a very different self when you get into regional, quote-unquote, Indian language writing. And I feel social sciences have lost out heavily by keeping Indian literature out. Not in terms of, you can use it as material, but if you had said, imagine anyone who wants to be a student of Indian society has to know at least one Indian language well enough to read its literature. If this is the primary requirement of a social science training, we would have a very different social science.
So there's also this very interesting chapter which talks about In Pursuit of Cultural Sight, where you speak about how Devanur Mahadeva and his use of that expression, cultural sight.
Yes.
So this is a running theme right through your book. It's a thread that binds this tapestry of your book's chapters. It's a plaintive cry for a better understanding of traditions and the epics.
Yes.
The Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and of course a lot of folk literature.
Yes.
The folk myth tales, mythological tales. And this book is replete with, for Frontline, you just now read out that story.
Yes.
Could you just read out that particular story about the owl?
Did you like it? Okay.
I can find it for you.
Yeah, no. Very quickly, the essay Suresh referred to, In Pursuit of Cultural Sight, Devanur Mahadeva is an important Kannada writer. So he's giving a speech at a literary gathering of, secular students of literature who want literature to be in the forefront of a democratic activism. Right? So he is saying, if you want to engage with democratic issues, with local society, our society, you have to engage the mythical imagination. You can't say, I'm secular, I don't care about quote-unquote religious literature. You can see Ramayana, Mahabharata as religious literature or not, but the Puranas. He's saying it is such a part of, whether you agree or not, over the centuries, it's come to become part of people's minds, and you'll have to work with it. And please, this will be of local interest for you. He begins by quoting Kuvempu, the great Kannada writer, who quoted his meeting with a DMK activist in the 70s. Kuvempu is addressing a similar gathering of literature students, and he is saying, I told the DMK activist, I asked him, what do you do when the jewels in your family become old. And do you throw them away, or do you melt them and make new ornaments out of it? And this was Kuempu's way of saying, if something has become old and it's not serving you the way it was serving you behind, it's not a question of throwing them out. You will not, they're too valuable to be thrown out. You reinterpret them, you rework them creatively, etc., and you keep the conversation going, even though you may have done something very new with it. So for you to keep doing something new with something, you have to know the old quite intimately to be creative with it. And so this is the running thread in this book, actually. I mean, you want to address contemporary concerns. Could you not explore already existing moral conversations and innovate them, stretch them in new ways, make them do new things? I mean, please let me add as a caveat, this is not the tyranny of engaging the past or the traditional world necessarily always, but this is one way of thinking about it. I mean, you feel free to carve out your stances, ethical, moral, intellectual, the way you wish. But given the way, moral conversations from the past, to use a generic term, be it whether it took scriptural form, whether it took narrative form, whether it took any other form of aphorism or whatever, continues to be here. Just imagine a 75-year-old commitment of the Indian state to make everyone literate in modern education. Hasn't happened still. And we are saying, please let's make it happen. Or we are saying, okay, maybe we should rethink the education model itself, considering the persistence or the continuing livingness of something else. Can't we look at them differently? So that's the thing. And please remember, not in an uncritical fashion, not in an orthodox, odd, worshipful fashion, but please remember when you inherit something, it is not a dry mechanical fact. You're acquiring it and putting it to use in a new way. There is no other way. There is a new way in which you're reusing.
You have the chapter
them.
on
Yes.
education and how Gandhiji, sort of his critical curiosity about the education system of the past, sort of informed that effort.
So Suresh, what was your... Oh, read the story. Okay. Yeah. So this, I'm also very aware of how our discussions become so human-centric, so social-centric, and leave out the animal world. One of the chapters I have here is about how, if you saw the roles of animals in the films of the past, they actually had a moral role to play. And you can think of so many films in so many languages, but now you're looking at them in a modern fashion as biological facts. You have pet food, the world of veterinarians. This has changed the way animals have come to be seen. So again, alerting us to how please remember, when you talk about sociology as a study of society, you only have human society in mind. And this is how the West successfully kept out the plant world, the animal world, any other life form, and said human society is all that we need to study. But here again, that division of society as something that has only humans in it and nature as being seen outside of it still hasn't happened. So these films for me were an instance of that kind of a worldview existing here. So I have two animal stories. One of them is short enough to be read here. And this is a Kannada folk story. The second one is from Nagaland, which I won't have time to read. Ninga and Basava, two men, lived in the same village. Basava was well off. Ninga was very poor. Early in the morning, Basava would make his way to a peepal tree to get a glimpse of the eagle Garuda. He began his day with a glimpse of the Garuda. It's an auspicious bird to see. But Ninga would walk over to a hill and start his day with a glimpse of an owl. Ninga continued to be poor. The owl asked him once, "Everyone begins their day with a glimpse of Garuda. Why do you start yours with mine?" Ninga begged, pleaded with him, "O owl king, please lift me out of my misery." The owl thought for a bit and said, Goddess Lakshmi will visit your home on Friday. Make sure you and your wife keep your home clean and tidy, and also keep a knife handy. I'll come at the same time as Lakshmi, cut my neck on the threshold of your house, and spill the blood along its length. Desperate to get over the hardship, Ninga agreed to do as the owl said. On Friday, Lakshmi and the owl arrived at Ninga's home around noon. Ninga did just as the owl had advised him. Finishing her visit, Lakshmi tried to leave through the front door, but halted on seeing the blood-lined threshold. Ninga's miseries ended soon thereafter. He even became wealthier than Basava. Since the owl confined the goddess of wealth to one man's home, it is better to avoid looking at it. The story. So you know, how this is a complex story. It's trying to give you an account of why the owl has come to be seen as inauspicious, but also taking the owl's point of view. It had actually sacrificed its own life to help him. I thought it was giving it a kind of a hearing and asking you to.
Yeah, I think the fascinating part of this book is that he doesn't try to take a position and say that, you know, this is a better approach or that is a worse approach. He doesn't stand judgment on, you know, bring in his own personal views on what is right and what is wrong. So what he has tried to do through all these stories and vignettes is to offer to the reader the possibilities that the traditional, the epic, have always had, and which to a large extent have sort of got ignored or swept under the carpet. I want to now sort of turn your attention, Chandan, to the other chapter, which is a fascinating chapter in the current contemporary context, the Ramayana on the human condition.
Yes.
And you sort of adverted to that about, you know, Purusha and Prakriti.
Yes.
Just now when you spoke.
Yes.
About how contemporary education and the Western approach to the utilitarianism has sort of divorced man from seeing, you know, things in other aspects. Sort of the ecological balance has been upset. So, and the other interesting thing about your book is that you have Prasanna and Siddhalangaya sort of right through the book as two key people who sort of have helped you focus on different aspects of, you know, the folklore and traditions. Yes. So, in the Ramayana chapter, what is it that you really want to sort of convey in that chapter? I sort of got it, but I want to hear it in your own words, and especially for the audience.
Yeah, thank you. There's a chapter here called Ramayana on the human condition. It's you would think it's the title of a book, but it's the title of a short chapter. Two things, you know, if you remember, the Valmiki's Ramayana begins with a hunter who, lets an arrow disrupt the mating of two birds, the Krauncha birds, right? And that there's a reading in the Sankhya tradition of that as a separation of Purusha and Prakriti. That the epic is trying to protest the separation of humans from nature. If you want to translate Purusha as humans and Prakriti as nature. So Prasanna, who is a theatre director, who's also written two plays on the Ayodhya Kanda and the Aranya Kanda. So he goes on to say, look, the Ramayana is also trying to say many other things. One thing, the virtues of ashrama life in the forest. Live simply, many people are working. It is not just a place where people just meditate and do penance all the time. It's a place of active work. People are sharing in the tasks. If deer are seen in pictures of ashrama, it's because they've come seeking refuge and they've sought refuge. It's not that they're ornamental creatures, you know, running around. So the idea of, you know, organizing society as an ashram is being held up as virtuous. People living simply. No palaces there, no servants there. Everyone is working. And there's another thing there. He says, if you look at Lanka, Lanka is a very urban place. Urban place in the sense, it's a city. The weapons Ravana and his sons and brothers fight with are sophisticated weapons. And Rama's army has just sticks, things like that to fight with. And there's culture in Lanka. Culture in the sense, Ravana is a scholar, when Hanumanta, tries to meet Sita, he drops in on Ravana's, court, and there's been a revelry, and they were eaten a lot. There's the scenes of disorder everywhere. There are poets, musicians. They've had a night of enjoyment, and then there's food everywhere, spilling over the plates, etc. So Prasanna is saying that's a sign of disorder, contrast with the life in the forest. So he was trying to see if there's a critique of urban civilization, where people are just enjoying things, the arts and seeking pleasure, as opposed to the ashrama life in the forest, where work is something everybody has to do and live simply, etc. And I thought that was an important contrast. That is a reading he was offering. Valmiki may not have had it in his mind, or may have had, I don't know, but it is an interpretation that is worth thinking about. And considering our own current ecologically based arguments against high energy consuming cities, and we're trying to decentralize the economic system, decentralize the polity, because that seems to be the only practically wise thing to do. Please remember, when Gandhi was advocating Gram Swaraj, everyone thought it was impractical. What an impractical thing to propose. But if the current trends continue, that may be forced to become a practical idea in terms of how our, transport and supply of things and travel, etc., comes to be reconfigured. I don't know. But so there's a way in which the Ramayana could be read in ways that there has not been in traditional retellings of the epic.
Yeah, that again is another very interesting thing which runs right through. You have this bit about Hind Swaraj and later CP from Gandhi, the constructive program of Gandhiji. And you also have this other chapter where you speak about, wanting us all to become Shudras.
Yes.
Which again is a sort of metaphor.
Yes.
Would you like to talk about that chapter?
Yes. Again, that's the name of Prasanna's book. He's got a book with the title Let's Become Shudras. And what he means by that is, if modern civilization puts its faith on the machine to do the labor and eventually dispense with the need for any physical work, if that is the utopia of science fiction novels, right? And it's seen as a desirable thing to be doing, that you have machines doing the work and humans are not laboring. So he's saying, if in the Varna scheme of things, if the activity of manual labor is associated with the Shudras, and the activity of a life without manual labor is associated with the upper Varnas, he was saying, let's embrace the culture of manual labor. So that's what he meant. So he was seeing physical labor as something essential to be appreciated and valued by everyone in whatever form. And this is again continuous with the other argument again for decentralized living and so yeah.
There again, Ila Bhatt, Seva,
yes.
100-mile communities.
Yes.
That's another chapter. So it's something which runs right through your book. The other aspect, which is again very interesting, is you have all these personalities whom you've written about.
Yes.
You are Anantamurthy.
Yes.
And you have also other personalities, Puneet Rajkumar.
Yes.
More contemporaneous, and probably I think you sort of also wanted to refer to him because that was a way to get back, sort of back reference to Rajkumar himself.
Yes.
On whom again you have a chapter.
Yes.
You have a section called Modernity on Trial.
Yes.
And that's a very important sort of thing for you because running through again as a, as someone who's looking at development and an alternative paradigm of development, you want to sort of say that modernity doesn't seem to be working for us. Is that the thrust of your sort of?
Yeah, I think that's a correct and fair characterization of the overall effort. The Modernity on Trial could have been the title of this book actually. So I said a while back that one of the key, modernity distorts our sense of the past. What I meant by that is, it presents a vision of history as a linear vision of progress from tribal community to agricultural community to industrial community. And you see that those stages as natural stages of evolution. And The West has gone through those stages successfully, and we are yet to go through those stages successfully because we have all of them co-present. We have tribals, we have agricultural villages, and we have cities. So an undesirable state to be. So when do we become fully modern? India will become half urban, 50% of India will live in cities in 40, and when will 100% of Indians live in villages? That's the imagination. And there is no sense of irony in these discussions. I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, that Tamil Nadu has a committee which says, we will become fully urban soon, how do we plan for it? And one of the members of the community, I was actually at my institute a few months ago, I heard about it from him. I said, where is this certainty coming from? That this is the way things are headed, and it's a good way to be headed. And when the West has come unstuck, all those societies that, were priding themselves on having become fully urban and modern and were asking us to follow them, are rethinking where they are from multiple vantage points. The ecological vantage point, and what has happened to human relations, that vantage point. Communities have eroded. We have thick community lives still, in cities too. Why just villages? Even our cities are not the cities of the West. In fact, many of our minds are still rural minds. And I'm not saying this in a manner of accusation. I think it's nothing to be apologetic about. It tells you something about the resilience of a certain way of thinking about other humans and the world. So I really, really feel, we are up against a really strong rival, an intellectual rival. That is the vision of modernization. And we've had this vision ever since the British came, over 200 years. Many Indians fell for it. They felt yes. But their argument was we can become modern on our own. We don't need the British to help us become modern. But then there was a figure like Gandhiji and so many saints across the country who didn't allow themselves to be seduced by this vision. They continued to be bewildered. They didn't understand what was going on. They didn't get into the discussion. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa did not get into the discussion of how to make India modern. And there are hundreds of people like him. Ramakrishna Adiga, right? Adiga, the Tamil figure, late 19th century. Ramalinga Adigar. He was one of those. There are so many of those. And then you have characters like Kuvempu and Prasanna and a whole host of others, many in the audience, I'm sure, who wants to somehow respond to this question properly. Now, how do we become properly modern or properly traditional? Take your pick. And then you have a camp that wants to be purely and fully traditional. And we know what that camp is. That's a problem, that views tradition in uncritical terms. That actually is an unfair, incorrect representation of tradition. Because tradition has always questioned itself. In fact, many, many parts of this book will show you examples of how tradition is questioning itself. So it doesn't need someone from the modern times to say, you guys were like that. How could you be like that? They themselves were asking themselves how they could be like that in many cases. And that's something to remember before we congratulate ourselves on having arrived at a liberal understanding and looking around to see how illiberal everybody else was and is. So I think, sorry Suresh, I don't know if that's allowed.
He does do that. Whether it's Kuvempu, whether it's Masti, everyone whom you've written about, they don't come through as unidimensional people. Yeah. You've managed to capture the fact that every one of them has looked at things from very different perspectives at different points in time, and they're also products of their own circumstances and times. And there's also this interesting chapter where where's this whole thing, complicated situation where the democratic imagination of a poem, Kuvempu's work, and where Tejasvi, Purnachandra Tejasvi doesn't, sort of sign on, and the government of Karnataka decides to go ahead and I'd just like to briefly talk to us about that.
Yeah. Karnataka has a state song. Do you have a state song?
We do.
Nadagite. You have a Nadagite? Okay.
Yeah.
So we got a Nadagite after Kuvempu's death. In Kuvempu's poem, where he sings, the poem runs through the beauties of Karnataka, the famous figures of Karnataka, who's passed through Karnataka. Shankaracharya is part of it, and Madhvacharya is part of it, Kabir is part of it. This imagination of who have blessed this land. And in the original poem that he had written in 1928, when he was only 24 years old, Madhvacharya had not found mention. And Madhvacharya is someone who from Udupi, and he's another, of the three big acharyas, he is one. And his justification for the omission was that unlike Shankaracharya and Ramanujacharya, who were Advaitins and Vishishtadvaitins, who believed that philosophically the world was one, even when they may have accepted social inequalities of caste, theologically they felt everything was the same, etc. Unlike them, Madhvacharya actually said there's a duality. God is separate and the world is separate, Jivatma and Paramatma, which then allowed for them to accept and give legitimacy to caste. So Kuvempu said this doesn't quite belong. This vision is imperfect, not a good vision for me to include in my poem. So now we are, of course, in Karnataka is, now independent. It's not colonial Mysore anymore, and it's Nad Gita. And the Madhva Mathas in Udupi, the 8 Mathas, they protested. You can have a Keralite like Shankaracharya, a Tamilian like Ramanujacharya, why not a Kannadiga like Madhvacharya? It even reached these absurd modern levels of discussion. Purnachandra Kuvempu is, of course, dead. Tejasvi, his son, came up and offered this reasoning. This is why father had left these out, etc. But it was amazing to me to see how many people wrote letters to the newspaper editor discussing Madhva philosophy as being this or that or something else, etc. And the article is not really about the poem or Madhvacharya. It's really to say how we will remain these outside observers to this discussion that is unfolding in our midst. And none of us have the faintest sense for these philosophies because we haven't encountered it anywhere. And it's a living controversy. It's not like some 2 or 3 people fighting with specialized knowledge. Many wrote. It's a raging debate. So again, to point to the inadequacy of our education system. So we hear these 3 names and we also hear monism, qualified monism, dualism, and we move on. Answer fill in the blanks and we move on. But no one has a sense for these things. And I think a certain training in some philosophy, of at least major strands, and I don't only mean Sanskritic philosophy. In fact, part of the thrust of the book is to show philosophical thinking has come from a variety of sources: Sanskritic, non-Sanskritic, high Indic, tradition, low tradition, little tradition, whatever you want to call them. So it's really even what we consider folk stories in a condescending way to mean it's just a story. I mean, it's actually a philosophical articulation. And there are those stories there, some of them, The Servant and the Goddess, which I would urge you to read first if you buy this book, is one such story. I thought there was an extraordinary seriousness about how to reorganize society. Yes.
The entire section on personalities every one of them is just brilliant because, the gesture of Nisar Ahmad,
yes,
it's very moving and deeply, should I say, I got reminded of Naqvi's book, Saeed Naqvi's book.
Yes.
Because, there's a lament from him about why is it that, you all can't see me see us as part of the Indian tradition.
Yeah.
And then, since we are having a paucity of time, we need to also open it up to the audience. There's the other chapter on the Gandhi of the Malnad, a politician who does so much in primary education.
Yes.
And you can make a difference, is the message that it's a very positive, very sort of uplifting, should I say, personality that you talk about.
Thank you.
And then there's DRN and his, you have this reaction, you're listening to Rushdie.
Yes.
And, you get quite agitated.
Yes.
And you have a long chat with DRN.
Yes.
And he tells you about how, indifference is the best way to react to arrogance.
Yes.
Would you very briefly just sort of touch upon that little thing? And, he says there are 2 ways to address this whole thing.
Yes.
So just mention those 2 things.
Very quickly. I'm glad. D.R. Nagaraj is someone you may have heard of. He was a Kannada literary critic who died very young at the age of 44. He was very close to me. So when I was doing my PhD in Pittsburgh, Salman Rushdie visited, gave a talk, and Christopher Hitchens introduced him. It was a grand packed hall, and at some point, Rushdie said, the best of Indian writing in English, Indian literature today is happening in English and not in Indian languages. That has, it intrigued me. And the Q&A happened, and someone actually asked him, what did he mean by that? A white American asked him. And he proceeded, they write about bright burning and mock heroism. And that really, puzzled. But Rushdie is doing it in the complete confidence that he has the whole audience with him, who will surely accept his reading of these things. And then D.R. Nagaraj was visiting faculty at the University of Chicago, not too far from Pittsburgh. So I called him and I described what happened. And he said, ahankarake udasinave maddu. Meaning, indifference is the best response to arrogance. And then I go on to talk about how there are two things he said one must cultivate. One is, you need to, or critical intuitionism is what he called it. He said, the Western universities, the knowledge system, it's like an armory, right? Specialized knowledge in every field. There is so much archival might that they come to understand themselves and the rest of the world. And when we want to look at Ramlinga, Adigar, you'll have to look, is there a book on this? And I think a book is just coming out actually in English. So what do you do in that case? Do you just despair saying that, so DR was saying, you have something called intuition, work with it. Don't only think knowledge is the only way, acquiring knowledge in a certain university setup is the only way to become creatively bold, etc. That's one thing. The other thing was...
The modern libraries, he said.
Yes.
Put aside the modern libraries and the archives.
Yes. And the other thing I thought was a confident skepticism. He said, I don't know if it's his phrase or my phrase, I think it's a psychological attitude actually, that a healthy, the phrase healthy skepticism everybody knows, but a confident skepticism at dominant cultures when you interact with them is something good to have. Yes.
Yeah, we'll now throw it open to the audience because I'm sure a lot of people here would want to ask you questions.
Hi, I'm from US. I'm retired from corporate work and my hobby is reading now and blogging. As a Tamilian, we believe, and it's positive, at least in my case, a very positive belief, that Bangaloreans are very laid back and casual.
Yeah.
And to tell you, you have, in such a casual and laid back fashion, intrigued me so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'm now walking out to buy your book.
No, thank you.
I have a very personal question, but this is merely to understand. Do you, as a professor, when people write you, do you have time to respond?
I actually do respond to every email I get, but it is not usually instantly, but I do respond.
Okay, that was really the question.
Thank you.
I'm sure a lot of aspects in that book which I would like to read and discuss.
Thank you. The laid-backness image of old Mysore state is a very real one, and people think, take it quite seriously in the sense of, Mysore still, if you visit Mysore, it's always saying, oh my God, we still haven't become Bangalore. Maybe we'll never become Bangalore, we should never become. Because there's a certain kind of a slowness to how things are done, and that was seen as a good thing. And Bangaloreans will be impatient. Why are people slow? Why is not things happening quickly, etc. But it's a way of the culture actually.
In our ancient days, we have occupational system, certain occupational system, also joint family system.
Yeah.
So it was basically labor intensive, whether it's in the family or in the occupation.
The mic closer to your mouth.
What I am saying is there is a shift from our system, in the Indian system. The ancient system is characterized by the occupational, they based on occupational groups. And it is labor intensive.
Yes.
So certain values were developed. The human is very important in those days. And the second point is the joint family system also we are changing. There also we lost a lot of values. The modern system is energy-based systems. There is a shift here. Basically, the family level, at the, even in the occupation level, there is a lot of changes. This created a lot of advantage, also a lot of problems. We lost so many values. How do we become aware of the ancient India, the lifestyle, and then get all the good values from those life, and then put it in our modern life? Is it possible? Do we have education system or a history about these things? I think that is the only thing I see the changes. In my life, I saw these changes. I came from a village,
Yes.
but I saw this kind of change. So have anybody written some books on this? What we are losing because of this change?
His
Really.
book,
Thank you.
Chandan's book is all about that, sir. You should read it, sir.
No, but it's a tempting thing to say, I can restore how things were. I think that's a temptation one must avoid, because we are, in a fundamental sense, in an evolving, dynamic context, where the family system form, the nuclear family has become an important family form in cities. Now, we can't say, let's resurrect the old joint family system. But at the same time, I would not be impatient with existing joint family systems and to say that become nuclear very quick or something like that. But you should allow space for self-critique and self-reform to themselves, rather than imposing it from the outside. All you can do is put an argument in front and see how people respond. But the fact of one of the stories, people were falling in love all through time. And if the family disapproved, they set up their own household. So the idea of a nuclear family being completely new is also something to question, because our images of the past are so archetypal. We think it's all joint family system. Of course, that was a dominant family system, but there were exceptions all the time.
I have a
And they
question.
were allowed.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. We are talking about knowledge.
Yes.
Whether it is Oriental or Occidental,
Yes.
what does it matter? We are talking about, I got a feeling that we are a little averse to Western education, and that I thought was a little, I could find that was a thread in many of your statements. Perhaps if I'm wrong, I would like to be corrected.
Yes.
But that's what I found in your talk. The other issue was an obsession with culture. While culture is important, do we need to be obsessed with our culture?
Yes.
Thank
you very much. That's I'm glad you asked that question. No, this is by no means an absolute rejection of everything Western. You know, if scientific connotations in the 20th century or the 19th century have largely happened there, there's no point in saying we won't engage you, because they have a lot to contribute. So not to be, and this is not an argument against reading English literature. It's not an argument against social science. I mean, just do them differently. So we are trying to, not have a clean start, a fresh start. You cut everything off and start with India or tradition, whatever. No, it's a reorientation work that needs to be done. The second question was an important one. Culture. Yeah, you're right. Someone could, and I've imagined a phantom enemy asking me, what about how will this help replace capitalism? It might not. I mean, we have a business editor here. He will have a better sense for what needs to be done to replace capitalism. But an obsession with economic system alone has also meant the eclipse of an interest in culture. And as we know, in India today, culture is the most important determining, it's the most important, thing in the public discussion, at least. Right? We can say the economy matters more, livelihoods matter more, employment matters more, all of them matter more. But at the same time, you can't say culture is secondary. They're all important. And if you want to go a step further, what excites the Indian mind symbolically, it is what one calls culture. I mean, the distinction of culture and economy, these are all debates that have happened, and we don't know if they're perfect divisions. But the fact remains that when you say a cultural statement goes a long way, and in fact, the difficulty, if you want to get political, what is the opposition to do? It has to think of a cultural counter. Because you need another image of India to offer against or alongside the other image of India that's being presented to you, right? And that's a cultural image. And how do you do it is a huge challenge, but it has to be done. Because for too long, people thought governance was enough for a state government to do. Good governance, and let's all go home. But as we know, governance plus what are we as a civilization is a question that will demand answers, and some have given answers of the bad kind. We'll have to see what kind of proper answers, responsible answers, wise answers we'll find for that question. Because that, who am I as an Indian, will be an important question. Or who are we as an Indian society? I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you, Chandan.
Thank you, Suresh.
It's a fascinating book.